Eleanor Jenkins sat at her kitchen table, sipping her morning tea and staring at the letter that had arrived yesterday. At 72, she rarely received mail that wasn't bills or advertisements. This was different. The colorful envelope had a television network logo in the corner, and inside was an invitation to appear on Laugh Factor, a show her grandchildren often talked about. Her weathered hands, knuckles swollen from years of arthritis, trembled slightly as she read the letter again. According to the invitation, they wanted her to showcase her piano playing on their segment called Hidden Talents. The letter mentioned how they celebrated people with unique abilities and provided a platform for them to share their gifts with the world. This has to be some kind of mistake, Eleanor muttered to herself, adjusting her reading glasses. She hadn't performed in public for over 20 years. Not since the arthritis had gotten bad enough that she couldn't play without pain shooting through her fingers. The phone rang, cutting through her thoughts. It was her grandson, Peter. "Grandma, did you get the letter? From the TV show?" Eleanor frowned. "How did you know about that?" "Well," Peter hesitated. "Remember my roommate Dave? The one who got that job in TV production last year? He works for Laugh Factor now, and I might have mentioned that my grandmother was once an amazing pianist." "Peter," Eleanor sighed, "I haven't been an amazing pianist since before you were born. These hands can barely open a jar of pickles these days. But you still play at home, right? You told me you practice every morning." It was true. Despite the pain, Eleanor still sat at her old upright piano each morning, playing scales and simple pieces to keep her fingers moving. Her doctor had actually encouraged it as therapy for her arthritis, but that was a far cry from performing Chopin or Beethoven on television. "This show isn't right for someone like me," she said firmly. "They want young people with unusual talents, not old ladies who can barely stretch an octave anymore." Peter's voice grew serious. "Grandma, do you remember what you always told me when I wanted to quit piano lessons? Music isn't about showing off. It's about sharing something beautiful. Think about all the older people who might be inspired seeing someone their age on TV, showing that passion doesn't have an expiration date." Eleanor felt a tug at her heart. After retiring from 40 years of teaching music at the local elementary school, she'd lost her connection to sharing music with others. She'd always believed that music education was important for everyone, regardless of age or ability. "They'll provide transportation," Peter continued, sensing her hesitation weakening. "Dave said they'll make sure you're comfortable and take care of everything." "It's just one song, Grandma." "I don't know. It's for a special episode about how music brings generations together. They're trying to promote music education for seniors." "Isn't that what you've always believed in?" Eleanor looked at the old piano in her living room, visible through the kitchen doorway. The morning sun highlighted the worn spots on the keys where decades of fingers had pressed down in search of beauty. "One song," she finally agreed. "Something simple. Maybe Debussy's Clair de Lune. I can still manage that on good days." Peter's excitement bubbled through the phone. "This is going to be amazing, Grandma." "Dave will call you with all the details." After hanging up, Eleanor walked slowly to her piano and sat down on the bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys as a doubt crept in. What was she thinking? Performing on television at her age? She hadn't played for anyone but herself in years. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparations. Dave, Peter's roommate, called with details and reassurances. He seemed genuinely excited to have her on the show, though Eleanor noticed he was vague about exactly how the segment would work. "Just be yourself," he kept saying. "The audience loves authentic people sharing their passions." Eleanor practiced more diligently than she had in years, pushing through the pain in her joints. On good days, she could almost recapture the fluidity she'd had in her 50s. On bad days, she wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. Her neighbor Judy helped her choose a night outfit, a sky blue dress that Eleanor had bought years ago for a former student's wedding but had never worn. "You look elegant," Judy assured her. "Like a real pianist." "I was a real pianist," Eleanor replied. "A lifetime ago." The night before the show, Peter came to her house for dinner, bringing takeout Chinese food, her favorite. "Are you nervous, Grandma?" he asked as they ate. Eleanor nodded. "Terrified. I keep thinking about all the things that could go wrong. What if I freeze up? What if my hands hurt too much to finish the piece? Then you'll stop and explain. People will understand, but I don't think that'll happen. When you play, you go somewhere else. I've seen it. Later, after Peter left, Eleanor sat alone in her living room. The house felt unusually quiet. She thought about calling the show to cancel, but the idea of disappointing her grandson stopped her. Besides, maybe Peter was right. Maybe someone watching would be inspired to return to music, or to not give it up in the first place. The morning of the show dawned bright and clear. Eleanor woke early, her stomach in knots. She made tea but couldn't eat breakfast. Her hands felt stiff, so she soaked them in warm water and gently stretched each finger. The car the show sent arrived precisely at 10 o'clock. The driver was polite, helping Eleanor with her seatbelt and asking if the temperature was comfortable. During the hour-long drive to the studio, Eleanor tried to calm her nerves by looking out the window and reminding herself of all the recitals she'd played in throughout her life. The television studio was nothing like she'd imagined. It was much bigger, louder, and colder than she expected. People rushed about with clipboards and headsets, barely noticing her as the production assistant, not Dave, but a young woman named Kelly led her through a maze of corridors. "We're so excited to have you," Kelly said, walking quickly enough that Eleanor had to work to keep up. "The Hidden Talents segment is one of our most popular. What exactly happens during this segment?" Eleanor asked, a new worry forming. "Oh, it's simple. You'll meet our hosts, chat a bit about your background, and then play your piece. The audience loves to be surprised by our guests." They arrived at a small waiting room with a few chairs and a table of snacks and water bottles. "You can wait here. Someone will come get you when it's time. Probably about 45 minutes. Left alone, Eleanor felt her anxiety growing. She tried to flex her fingers, wincing at the stiffness. She should have brought her arthritis medication. She'd been so nervous she'd forgotten. Through the thin walls, she could hear voices from a nearby room. Curious, she stepped closer to the door. "This piano granny segment is going to kill," a man's voice said, followed by laughter. "Did you see her picture? Looks like she can barely hold a spoon, let alone play Chopin." "The audience is going to lose it," another voice added. "We haven't had a good disaster act in weeks." Eleanor froze, her heart pounding. "Disaster act? Were they talking about her?" The voices continued, moving away, but she'd heard enough. This wasn't a celebration of senior musicians. This was entertainment at her expense. They were planning to ridicule her, to laugh at an old woman's diminished abilities. Eleanor sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. She felt sick. She'd been tricked, and worse, her own grandson had been used to lure her here. Though she was certain Peter didn't know the truth. She should leave right now, before she made a fool of herself on national television. She stood up, reaching for her purse when the door opened. It was Dave, looking flustered. "Mrs. Jenkins, you're up in 10 minutes. Is there anything you need before you go on?" Eleanor looked at him coldly. "Did you know about what this segment really is?" Dave's expression faltered. It's complicated. The show has a certain format, but people love it. And sometimes our guests really do surprise everyone. You used my grandson to get me here," she said quietly. "To laugh at an old woman with arthritis trying to play piano." Dave had the decency to look ashamed. "It's not exactly like that. And anyway, it's too late now. You're scheduled. The audience is waiting. You signed the release forms." Eleanor felt trapped. If she left now, she'd still be the joke, the old lady who ran away. At least if she stayed, she could face them on her own terms. "There's a piano backstage for warm-up," Dave offered weakly. "You've got about 5 minutes before they call you." The backstage piano was old and clearly not maintained well. Several keys stuck when pressed, and it was noticeably out of tune. Eleanor played a few notes, her heart sinking further. This was deliberate, too. A stagehand appeared. "Mrs. Jenkins, you're on now." As Eleanor followed him toward the bright lights of the stage, she heard the host warming up the audience. "Next up, we've got a special treat, or should I say, an interesting experience coming your way. She claims she used to teach piano, but we'll let you be the judge of whether she should have stuck to the triangle." The audience roared with laughter. Eleanor stopped walking, nearly turning back. But then from somewhere deep inside, a spark of defiance ignited. These people thought they knew what to expect from her. They had no idea what she'd been capable of once, or what she might still do. Eleanor stood frozen in the wings of the stage, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. The bright studio lights felt harsh and unforgiving. She smoothed the front of her blue dress, suddenly feeling foolish for having worn her best outfit for what was clearly meant to be a mockery. And here she is, ladies and gentlemen. The host, a man named Timothy Reed with perfectly styled hair and an expensive-looking suit, stretched his arm toward the side of the stage. The piano teacher who thinks she still has what it takes. Let's welcome Eleanor Jenkins. A stagehand gently nudged her forward. That's your cue, ma'am. Eleanor took a deep breath and stepped into the blinding lights. The audience applauded, but she could hear undertones of anticipation in their clapping, the kind that comes when people are waiting for something embarrassing to happen. The stage floor was slick, and Eleanor moved carefully in her low-heeled shoes, conscious of every step. The last thing she needed was to fall before she even reached the piano. A young woman with a clipboard appeared beside her, guiding her by the elbow. "The piano is just over here," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Watch your step." In the center of the stage sat a grand piano. At least they'd given her a decent instrument, Eleanor thought, until she got closer and noticed the worn keys and scuff marks. This wasn't the show's main piano. It was clearly an old backup kept around for segments like hers. Timothy bounded over, microphone in hand, his smile wide and artificial. "Eleanor, welcome to Laugh Factor. You're looking very formal today." The audience chuckled, and Eleanor felt her cheeks grow warm. "Thank you for having me," she said quietly, her voice barely carrying. "Speak up, dear." Timothy cupped his ear dramatically. "The audience can't hear you." Those hearing aids must be turned down too low. More laughter rippled through the crowd. Eleanor didn't bother correcting him. She didn't wear hearing aids. "I said thank you for having me," she repeated, louder this time. "That's better. Now, Eleanor, I understand you used to teach piano to children?" "Yes, for 40 years at Pine Grove Elementary School." 40 years. Wow. Timothy turned to the audience with an exaggerated expression. "That's a lot of chopsticks, and Mary had a little lamb, folks." The audience laughed on cue. Eleanor tried to keep her expression neutral, though inside she felt a flicker of anger. She'd taught children Bach and Beethoven, not just nursery rhymes. "And you think you can still play? Even with those?" Timothy glanced down at her hands, his expression a mixture of mock concern and poorly hidden amusement. "Arthritic fingers?" Eleanor looked down at her hands. The knuckles were indeed swollen, the fingers slightly bent in ways they hadn't been in her youth. She had been self-conscious about them for years, wearing gloves in public even in warm weather. Now they were on display for hundreds of people in the studio and potentially millions at home. "I practice every day," she said simply. "Well, isn't that sweet?" Timothy's voice dripped with condescension. "And what will you be playing for us today? Something challenging, I hope." Eleanor had planned to play Clair de Lune, a piece that was gentle on her hands. But standing here, feeling the weight of the audience's expectation of failure, she made a split-second decision. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. Timothy's eyebrows shot up. Even he knew enough about classical music to recognize this was one of the most challenging pieces in the piano repertoire. "Well," he said, recovering quickly, "ambitious choice. Let's see if those old fingers can keep up with young Chopin's demands." He gestured toward the piano bench, and Eleanor made her way to it, acutely aware of how slowly she moved compared to the energetic host. Sitting down, she adjusted the bench, taking her time despite feeling the impatience of the audience. The bench was slightly wobbly, another detail that couldn't be accidental. She shifted her weight to find a stable position. "Comfy?" Timothy asked with exaggerated concern. "Need a cushion? A back brace, perhaps?" The audience laughed again. Eleanor ignored him, instead focusing on the keyboard before her. She placed her hands in her lap, closed her eyes, and took several deep breaths. An uncomfortable silence descended on the studio. "Uh-oh, folks," Timothy Stage whispered into his microphone. "I think she might have fallen asleep. Should we wake her?" More laughter, louder this time. Eleanor opened her eyes and looked directly at Timothy for the first time since she'd come on stage. Their eyes met, and something in her steady gaze made his smile falter slightly. "I'm ready now," she said quietly. Timothy backed away, making a show of giving her space. "Ladies and gentlemen, Eleanor Jenkins will now attempt, and I do mean attempt, to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1. Let's give her some encouragement, shall we?" The audience applauded half-heartedly. Eleanor placed her hands on the keys, wincing slightly at the twinge of pain in her joints. She pressed down gently on a few keys, testing the action and confirming what she'd suspected. The piano was slightly out of tune, the action heavy and uneven. She could hear murmurs from the audience as she took her time. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered loudly enough for her to hear. This is going to be a disaster. Eleanor looked out past the lights to where she knew the audience sat. Somewhere among them was Peter's roommate Dave, who had tricked her into coming here. She wondered if Peter was watching the show live, if he had any idea what kind of humiliation his grandmother was facing. The thought of Peter gave her pause. What would he think when he saw this? Would he be embarrassed for her? Would he blame himself? The idea of causing him pain was worse than any humiliation she might face. For a moment, Eleanor considered standing up and walking off the stage. It wasn't too late. She could refuse to participate in their cruel game. But then she remembered something, a moment from decades ago when she was still a young teacher. A student, a boy named Jimmy with a learning disability, had been forced by his father to perform in the school recital. The other parents had whispered, the other children had snickered, expecting him to fail. Jimmy had looked at Eleanor with terrified eyes before his performance, and she had simply nodded and whispered, "Play for yourself, not for them." Jimmy had played a simple piece perfectly that day, silencing everyone who had doubted him. Play for yourself, not for them. Eleanor straightened her back, feeling a new resolve. She would play, not for this audience that came to laugh, not for the smug host, not even for Peter. She would play for herself, for the teacher she had been, for every student she had taught to face their fears and play through mistakes. She lifted her hands once more, positioned them over the keys, and began. The opening notes of the ballade were tentative. Her fingers felt stiff and she missed a note in the simple introduction. She heard someone snicker. The piano's uneven action made the dynamics difficult to control, the soft opening coming out louder than she intended. As she moved into the main theme, her left hand cramped slightly, causing her to wince visibly. The audience was silent now, but she could feel their attention, their anticipation of disaster. Timothy stood at the edge of the stage, microphone ready, no doubt prepared with a quip for when she failed. The piece grew more complex, the runs of notes increasingly challenging. Eleanor's fingers moved more slowly than they once had. She simplified some of the more difficult passages, knowing she couldn't manage them with her arthritis. Sweat beaded on her forehead under the hot lights. A particularly difficult sequence approached, a series of rapid arpeggios that had challenged her even in her prime. Eleanor took a breath and dove in, her fingers finding each key through muscle memory developed over decades of practice. She missed several notes, the sound slightly muddled. She heard whispers, a few suppressed laughs, but she kept playing. The middle section of the piece was lyrical, less technically demanding. Eleanor relaxed slightly, letting the melody breathe. For a moment she forgot where she was, forgot the audience, forgot the pain in her hands. There was only the music, the same music that had sustained her through a lifetime of joys and sorrows. Her confidence growing, she played with more expression, her body swaying slightly with the emotional pull of the music. The piano might be out of tune, her fingers might be stiff, but the soul of the piece that was still within her reach. As she approached the finale, the most technically challenging part, Eleanor knew she couldn't play it as written. Instead of attempting the crashing octaves and lightning-fast runs that her hands could no longer manage, she improvised, creating a simpler but still effective climax to the piece. When she played the final chord, there was absolute silence in the studio. Eleanor sat motionless, her hands resting on the keys, her breathing heavy. She waited for the laughter, for Timothy's cutting remark about her modified performance. But there was only silence. She turned slowly on the bench, expecting to see smirking faces. Instead, she saw something entirely unexpected in the stage lights. Timothy stood frozen, his microphone hanging limply at his side, his expression one of complete shock. In the front row of the audience, a woman was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, and then from somewhere in the back, a single person began to clap. The sound echoed in the silent studio, solitary at first, then joined by another pair of hands and another, until the applause spread through the audience like a wave. Eleanor sat stunned, unable to process what was happening. This wasn't the reaction they had planned. This wasn't how the segment was supposed to go. As the applause continued to build, she realized that she had done something none of them had expected. She had played for herself. And in doing so, she had truly played for everyone. The applause continued, growing louder until it filled the entire studio. Eleanor sat frozen on the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys. This wasn't what she had expected. This wasn't what any of them had expected. Timothy, the host, stood nearby with an expression that flickered between disbelief and panic. This wasn't in his script. He fumbled with his microphone, clearly unsure how to proceed. A woman in the front row stood up, still clapping, tears visible on her cheeks. Then another person stood and another, until nearly the entire audience was on their feet. Eleanor blinked rapidly, convinced she must be imagining this response. From the corner of her eye, she spotted a stagehand frantically gesturing to Timothy, who finally snapped back to attention and approached Eleanor with a completely transformed demeanor. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice lacking its earlier mockery. "Eleanor Jenkins." The applause grew even louder. Eleanor remained seated, unsure what to do. Her hands were trembling now, partly from exhaustion and partly from shock. The pain in her fingers had returned with a vengeance after the exertion of playing, but she barely noticed it. Timothy leaned down, speaking without the microphone. "That was an unexpected. We need to go to commercial, but can you stay for a quick interview when we return?" Eleanor nodded mutely, still processing what was happening. "Fantastic, just stay right there." Timothy straightened and addressed the audience again. "We'll be right back after these messages with more from our remarkable guest." As soon as the red camera lights blinked off, the studio erupted into chaos. Production assistants rushed around, speaking urgently into headsets. Timothy immediately walked off stage, deep in conversation with a woman holding a clipboard who appeared to be the show's producer. A young man with a water bottle approached Eleanor. "Would you like some water, Mrs. Jenkins?"
"Yes, thank you," Eleanor said, her voice barely audible.
Her throat felt dry, her heart still racing. She took the bottle with shaking hands. Noticing that the young man was looking at her differently than the staff had earlier, there was something like respect in his eyes now. Behind her, a piano technician had appeared and was quickly making adjustments to the instrument, tightening strings and checking the action of the keys. Eleanor realized they were preparing for her to play again, something that clearly hadn't been in the original plan. From the wings of the stage, she spotted Dave, Peter's roommate, talking animatedly on his phone. When he saw her looking, he gave her a thumbs up and mouthed what looked like, "Peter's watching." Eleanor felt a surge of emotion at the thought of her grandson seeing her performance. The producer approached, introducing herself as Linda. "Mrs. Jenkins, that was truly remarkable. We'd like you to play another piece after the break if you feel up to it. Something shorter, perhaps?" Eleanor took a sip of water, trying to gather her thoughts. "My hands. I'm not sure they can manage another full piece right now." Linda nodded quickly. "Of course I understand. Maybe just a minute or two?" The audience is absolutely captivated. Eleanor considered this. Her fingers were indeed throbbing, but there was also a strange exhilaration coursing through her. It had been so long since she'd played for an audience. Really played, not just demonstrated simple pieces for students. And the response had awakened something in her that she thought had died years ago. "I could play a short nocturne," she offered. "Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It's gentler on my hands." "Perfect." Linda beamed. "And Timothy would like to ask you a few questions about your background, your training, your career. Would that be all right?" Eleanor nodded, still dazed by the turn of events. "Wonderful. We're back on air in 2 minutes." As the producer walked away, Eleanor flexed her fingers gently, trying to ease the stiffness. A makeup artist hurried over, dabbing at the sweat on Eleanor's forehead and applying a light powder to her face. "You were amazing," the young woman whispered as she worked. "My grandmother used to play piano too. She would have loved to see you today." Before Eleanor could respond, someone called out, "30 seconds to air." The audience, which had been buzzing with conversation during the break, quieted down. The floor director counted down with his fingers. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The red lights on the cameras illuminated again, and Timothy bounded back onto the stage with renewed energy, though his smile seemed more genuine now. "Welcome back to Laugh Factor. I'm sure I don't need to remind you of what we just witnessed. A truly extraordinary performance from our guest, Eleanor Jenkins." The audience broke into applause again. Eleanor smiled tentatively, still not quite believing this was happening. Timothy sat on a tall stool that someone had placed next to the piano. "Eleanor, I have to say you've surprised all of us today. That was Chopin's Ballad Number 1, wasn't it? One of the most challenging pieces in the classical repertoire? Eleanor nodded. Yes, it is. I used to play it when I was younger, though not quite the same way I played it today. She glanced down at her hands. I had to make some adaptations. Well, those adaptations were remarkable. Tell us about your background. Where did you learn to play like that? Eleanor took a deep breath, finding her voice. I started playing when I was 5 years old. My mother cleaned houses for a wealthy family who had a piano, and they let me practice on it. Eventually, they helped pay for lessons when they saw I had some ability. And did you ever play professionally? No, not professionally. I had the opportunity to audition for Juilliard when I was 18, but my father was ill and I needed to help support the family. Eleanor paused, remembering that long ago disappointment. I became a music teacher instead. I taught elementary school music for 40 years. 40 years of sharing your gift with children, Timothy said, his tone respectful now. That's quite a legacy. From the audience, someone called out, "Will you play something else for us?" Timothy looked momentarily annoyed at the interruption, but quickly recovered. Yes, I understand you've agreed to play another piece. Eleanor nodded, turning back to the piano. A nocturne, also by Chopin. Ladies and gentlemen, another performance from Eleanor Jenkins. The studio lights dimmed slightly, creating a more intimate atmosphere. Eleanor positioned her hands over the keys, noticing that the piano felt different, better adjusted, the action lighter. The technician had done his work well during the break. She began to play the nocturne, its gentle, dreamlike melody flowing from her fingers more easily than the technically demanding ballad had. This piece was about emotion rather than virtuosity, about the spaces between the notes as much as the notes themselves. As she played, Eleanor felt a lifetime of memories washing over her, teaching her first class of wide-eyed children, guiding small hands on piano keys, the recitals where she'd watched nervous students blossom into confident performers. Music had been the constant thread through all of it. The nocturne's middle section grew more intense, and Eleanor leaned into the emotion of it, temporarily forgetting the pain in her hands, the bright lights, the watching audience. There was only the music, speaking directly from her heart to theirs. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the applause began again, somehow even warmer than before. Timothy was shaking his head in amazement as he approached. Eleanor Jenkins, ladies and gentlemen. Truly extraordinary. The applause continued as Timothy helped Eleanor to her feet. She stood shakily, overwhelmed by the response. I think I can speak for everyone here when I say we are honored to have heard you play today, Timothy said, his earlier smirk replaced by what appeared to be genuine respect. Thank you for sharing your remarkable talent with us. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. As she was escorted off stage, the audience continued applauding. In the wings, staff members who had barely noticed her earlier now stepped aside respectfully. One young technician whispered, "My mom's going to freak out when I tell her I met you. She loves classical piano." In the small waiting room where she'd been left before the show, Eleanor finally sank into a chair, her legs weak, her hands throbbing, her mind still trying to process everything that had happened. Dave burst in, his face flushed with excitement. Mrs. Jenkins, you're trending on social media already. The clips of your performance are everywhere. Peter's been calling nonstop. He's absolutely beside himself. Eleanor looked up, still dazed. Trending? What does that mean exactly? It means everyone's talking about you. The phones here are ringing off the hook. News outlets, music blogs, everyone wants to interview you. Dave ran a hand through his hair, looking both excited and slightly panicked. The producers are calling an emergency meeting to figure out how to handle all the attention. This wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't what I expected either, Eleanor said quietly. Dave knelt down beside her chair, his expression contrite. Mrs. Jenkins, I need to apologize. I knew what this segment was supposed to be, and I shouldn't have involved you in it. I feel terrible about it now. Eleanor studied his face, seeing genuine remorse there. You thought I would embarrass myself. Yes, he admitted. But I was so wrong. Everyone was wrong. He hesitated, then added, The thing is, this show, it's never really celebrated actual talent. It's always been about laughing at people, until today. A production assistant appeared at the door. Mrs. Jenkins? There are some people who'd like to meet you. music critics from the City Symphony, and a reporter from Classical Music Monthly who happened to be in the audience. Eleanor blinked in surprise. Critics? Reporters? They're waiting in the green room if you're feeling up to it, the assistant said. Eleanor looked down at her swollen, aching hands, then back at the eager faces watching her. Something extraordinary had happened today, something she never could have anticipated when she'd reluctantly agreed to appear on this show. At 72, Eleanor Jenkins had finally played for an audience that truly listened. And somehow, despite everything, the out-of-tune piano, her arthritic hands, the years of teaching rather than performing, her music had reached their hearts. Yes, she said, rising slowly to her feet. I think I am feeling up to it. Eleanor woke up the next morning to the sound of her phone ringing. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the events of yesterday over and over again. She reached for the phone on her nightstand, wincing at the stiffness in her fingers. Hello? She answered, her voice still thick with sleep. Grandma. Finally, I've been calling for an hour. Peter's excited voice burst through the speaker. Are you okay? How are you feeling? This is absolutely wild. Eleanor sat up slowly, pushing her gray hair away from her face. I'm fine, Peter, just tired. My hands are sore today. I bet they are. Grandma, do you have any idea what's happening? Have you looked online? You know I don't use the internet much, Eleanor said, glancing at the ancient desktop computer gathering dust in the corner of her bedroom. Peter had set it up for her years ago, but she rarely turned it on. Well, you've gone viral. Like seriously viral. Your performance has millions of views already. Millions! People are sharing it everywhere. Eleanor tried to grasp what that meant. Millions of people have seen me play? Yes. And the comments, Grandma, people are amazed. Music teachers are sharing it with their students. Professional pianists are analyzing your technique. There's even a hashtag trending, your piano grandma. I know that sounds silly, but it's meant with total respect. Eleanor was silent, trying to process this information. Are you still there, Grandma? Yes, I'm here. It's just overwhelming, I know. And I'm so sorry about how it all happened. Dave told me everything about how the show was planning to make fun of you. He feels terrible. We both do. It wasn't your fault, Eleanor said. You didn't know. Still, Peter was interrupted by the sound of Eleanor's doorbell ringing. Someone's at the door, she said. It's not even 8 o'clock yet. It's probably reporters, Peter said. They found your address. Dave warned me that might happen. Reporters? At my house? Eleanor felt a flutter of panic. What should I do? Don't answer the door unless you want to talk to them. You don't have to say anything to anyone. The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. I should go see who it is, Eleanor said. Wait, Grandma, let me come over. I can help you deal with this. I can be there in 30 minutes. All right, Eleanor agreed, relieved at the offer. I'll wait for you. After hanging up, Eleanor put on her robe and slippers and cautiously approached her living room window. Peering through the curtains, she was shocked to see not just one person, but a small crowd gathered on her front lawn. A van with a TV station logo was parked at the curb. A woman was setting up a camera while a man in a suit checked his appearance in a compact mirror. Eleanor stepped back from the window, her heart racing. This wasn't something she was prepared to handle. She had never sought attention or fame. She had spent her life teaching children in a small elementary school, not performing on stages or giving interviews. She made her way to the kitchen, keeping away from the windows, and put on a pot of coffee. Her hands protested as she measured the grounds, the joint stiff and painful after yesterday's exertion. She took her arthritis medication and waited for the coffee to brew, trying to calm her nerves. Her phone rang again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. She let it go to voicemail. It immediately rang again, another unknown number. Then again, and again. Eleanor turned the ringer off, feeling increasingly overwhelmed. She poured herself a cup of coffee with shaking hands and sat at her kitchen table, waiting for Peter. When he finally arrived, she had to unlock the back door to let him in. He couldn't get through the crowd at the front. Grandma! Peter embraced her as soon as he was inside. This is crazy! There are reporters everywhere. I know, Eleanor said, her voice trembling slightly. I don't understand why they care so much about an old woman playing piano. Peter guided her back to the kitchen table and sat down across from her. Because what happened yesterday wasn't just about music. It was about Defying expectations, proving people wrong. Everyone loves that kind of story. He pulled out his phone and showed her a news website. There was her face, captured in the moment after she finished playing, looking stunned at the audience's reaction. The headline read, "Piano Teacher Silences Mockers with Stunning Chopin Performance." There are dozens of articles like this, Peter said, scrolling through his phone. And the show is getting a lot of criticism for trying to set you up for humiliation. The producers issued an apology this morning. Eleanor shook her head in disbelief. I never wanted any of this. I know. But look at some of these comments, Grandma. Peter began reading from his phone. This made me start practicing piano again after giving up 10 years ago. I cried watching this. My mother had arthritis and had to give up knitting. This gives me hope. I'm showing this to my students to teach them about perseverance. Eleanor felt tears forming in her eyes. People really said those things? Hundreds of them, maybe thousands by now. Peter reached across the table and took her hand gently. You've inspired people, Grandma. The doorbell rang again, followed by persistent knocking. What should we do about them? Eleanor asked, glancing toward the front of the house. That depends on what you want, Peter said. We could call the police and have them removed from your property. Or I could tell them you're not giving interviews, or I could talk to them. Eleanor finished his thought. Peter nodded. Only if you want to. You don't owe them anything. Eleanor considered this. The attention was unwanted and overwhelming, but there was also something about those comments Peter had read. The idea that her playing had somehow touched people, had meant something to them. Maybe just one interview, she said finally. But not out there with all of them. And not in my house either. Peter thought for a moment. How about the coffee shop down the street? I could arrange for one reporter to meet us there. Someone respectable. Eleanor nodded slowly. All right. Just one. Peter made some calls, and an hour later, they slipped out through the back door and walked 2 blocks to the small neighborhood coffee shop. The reporter Peter had selected, a middle-aged woman from the local newspaper, was waiting for them at a corner table. Mrs. Jenkins, thank you so much for agreeing to speak with me, the reporter said, standing to greet them. I'm Nancy Holland from the Daily Chronicle. Eleanor nodded politely as they sat down. I've never been interviewed before. I'm not sure what to say. Just tell me your story, Nancy said, setting a small recorder on the table. How did you end up on Laugh Factor? And where did you learn to play like that? Eleanor recounted the events leading up to the show, speaking slowly at first, then with increasing confidence as the interview progressed. She talked about her childhood, learning piano on a borrowed instrument. She spoke about her decision to become a teacher rather than pursue a performance career. And she described how, even after arthritis had changed her hands, she had continued to play every day, adapting her technique to accommodate her limitations. Music has always been my companion, she explained. Even when I couldn't play the way I once did, it was still there for me. And how do you feel about suddenly becoming famous at 72? Nancy asked. Eleanor smiled slightly. Confused mostly. I'm not sure what to do with all this attention. Do you have any plans now? Will you perform again? Eleanor shook her head. No, I don't think so. My hands won't allow it. Yesterday was an exception, a moment of defiance, perhaps. As they were finishing the interview, the coffee shop door opened and a man in an expensive suit walked in. He spotted their table immediately and approached with a confident stride. Mrs. Jenkins, my name is Richard Wilson. I'm the director of the City Symphony Orchestra. He handed Eleanor a business card. I wonder if I might have a word with you. Eleanor looked at Peter in confusion. He shrugged, appearing equally surprised. I'll leave you to it, Nancy said, gathering her things. Thank you for the interview, Mrs. Jenkins. It was an honor to meet you. As the reporter left, Richard took her seat. Mrs. Jenkins, I'll get right to the point. Your performance yesterday has sparked an important conversation in the classical music community about accessibility, ageism, and the barriers that prevent many talented musicians from being heard. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard by his directness. Our orchestra has been discussing ways to engage with older musicians and to make classical music more accessible to audiences of all ages. Your viral moment has accelerated those conversations. I'm not sure I understand what this has to do with me, Eleanor said. Richard leaned forward. We're launching a new program, master classes for senior musicians and intergenerational performance workshops. We'd like you to be involved as an advisor and occasional instructor. Me? Eleanor was genuinely shocked. But I was just a school music teacher. I never performed professionally, which makes you exactly the right person for this role, Richard insisted. You understand both the technical aspects of music and how to teach it to others. And now you've also demonstrated the impact that music can have when it bridges generations and expectations. Eleanor looked at Peter, who was grinning widely. You should do it. Grandma, he encouraged. I don't know. Eleanor hesitated. This is all happening so fast. Take some time to think about it, Richard said, standing up. Here's my card. Call me when you've made a decision. He paused, then added sincerely, For what it's worth, Mrs. Jenkins, your Chopin moved me to tears yesterday. That kind of musical communication is rare even among professionals. After he left, Eleanor and Peter sat in silence for a moment. What are you thinking? Peter finally asked. Eleanor looked down at the business card in her hand. I'm thinking about all the years I spent teaching children to love music. How I always told them that music was for everyone, not just for prodigies or professionals. She paused. And I'm thinking about how I almost walked off that stage yesterday. But you didn't, Peter reminded her. You played. And look what happened. Eleanor nodded slowly. Maybe there's still some teaching left for me to do after all. As they walked back to Eleanor's house, they found the crowd of reporters had dispersed. Only one TV van remained, and the crew appeared to be packing up. They'll lose interest soon, Peter assured her. This kind of fame usually doesn't last. Good, Eleanor said. I don't need fame, but maybe... She glanced down at Richard's card still in her hand. Maybe I do need a new chapter. That evening, as the sun set, Eleanor sat at her piano for the first time since her performance. Her fingers were still sore, but she placed them gently on the keys and began to play a simple melody, one of the first pieces she had taught her students. As she played, she thought about the unexpected turn her life had taken, how a moment intended for humiliation had transformed into something entirely different, how music, her lifelong companion, had once again opened a door she never expected to walk through. Outside her window, a few curious neighbors still lingered, hoping to catch a glimpse of the suddenly famous piano grandma. But Eleanor barely noticed them. She was already thinking about what she might teach in her first master class, about how to adapt when your hands or your life changed, about finding new ways to express the music that lived inside you, about playing for yourself, not for them, and how sometimes that was exactly what the world needed to hear. 6 months had passed since Eleanor's unexpected moment of fame on Laugh Factor. The initial frenzy had died down, just as Peter had predicted. The reporters had stopped calling. Her neighbors no longer pointed her out to visitors. Life had largely returned to normal, except that Eleanor's definition of normal had changed completely. On this particular Tuesday morning, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table reviewing the lesson plan for her afternoon class. Her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she made notes in the margins of the sheet music. Outside, spring rain tapped gently against the windows. The doorbell rang and Eleanor glanced at the clock right on time. She made her way to the front door, moving a bit more easily these days thanks to the physical therapy she'd been doing for her arthritis. Good morning, Mrs. Jenkins? A cheerful young woman stood on the porch holding a large umbrella. This was Nora, the music student from the local university who had been helping Eleanor with her new venture. Ready for the big day? As ready as I'll ever be, Eleanor replied with a small smile. Come in out of the rain. Nora shook out her umbrella and stepped inside. I brought the final program for your approval. She handed Eleanor a professionally printed booklet. The printer delivered them this morning. Eleanor examined the cover. Music Without Limits, a celebration of intergenerational performance, hosted by Eleanor Jenkins and the City Symphony Community Outreach Program. It looks wonderful, Eleanor said, feeling a flutter of both excitement and nervousness. I still can't quite believe this is happening. Well, believe it, Nora said, hanging up her coat. We've sold out all 300 seats, and the news crew will be there to cover it for the arts segment. Eleanor shook her head in amazement. All because I played the piano on a silly TV show. No, Nora corrected her gently. All because you turned a moment meant to humiliate you into something beautiful and inspiring. There's a difference. Eleanor smiled at the young woman's insight. Nora had been one of the first people to volunteer when Eleanor had finally called Richard Wilson and agreed to help develop the new program for the City Symphony. At 22, Nora was studying piano performance and music education, and she had immediately connected with Eleanor's vision for bringing together musicians of different ages and abilities. Together, they had spent the past 5 months building what had evolved into Music Without Limits, a program that paired senior musicians with physical limitations with younger students. The seniors shared their knowledge and experience, while the younger musicians helped them adapt their techniques to overcome physical challenges. "Is Peter coming to help transport the special equipment?" Nora asked, following Eleanor back to the kitchen. "Yes, he'll be here around noon. Would you like some tea?" As Eleanor put the kettle on, she reflected on how much had changed since that day on Laugh Factor. The most unexpected change had been in her relationship with the show itself. 2 weeks after her performance, the producers had called with a surprising proposition. They wanted to transform the Hidden Talents segment into something completely different. Instead of mocking ordinary people, they wanted to genuinely showcase overlooked talents, particularly from older performers and those with disabilities. And they wanted Eleanor to help develop and occasionally host the new segment. Her first instinct had been to refuse. She hadn't forgotten how they had planned to humiliate her. But then she had thought about all the other Eleanor Jenkinses out there, people with genuine talent who had been sidelined by age, disability, or circumstance. People who deserved to be seen and heard. So she had agreed with one firm condition. She would have final approval over how contestants were treated. No more setups. No more mockery. Just authentic appreciation for genuine talent, whatever form it took. "The kettle's boiling," Nora pointed out, pulling Eleanor from her thoughts. "Oh, thank you." Eleanor poured the hot water into the teapot. I was lost in thought. "Nervous about tonight?" Nora asked. "A little," Eleanor admitted. "It's been a long time since I've been involved in organizing a concert, and I've never been the centerpiece of one before. Tonight's event would be the culmination of the first Music Without Limits workshop series. 20 senior musicians who had given up performing due to physical limitations had been paired with 20 young music students. Together, they had spent 12 weeks working on adapted techniques and modified instruments. Tonight, they would perform together at the City Symphony Hall, and for the finale, Eleanor herself would play a duet with the symphony's principal pianist, a special arrangement of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major that accommodated her arthritic hands. "Everyone's so excited," Nora said. "My professor says this program could become a model for other orchestras around the country." Eleanor smiled. "One step at a time. Let's see how tonight goes first." After finishing their tea, they spent the next hour reviewing the final details for the concert. Eleanor had discovered that she had a talent for this kind of organization, perhaps from all those years arranging school recitals. Around noon, Peter arrived with his friend Dave in tow. Both were carrying large boxes of equipment. "Special delivery for Mrs. Jenkins," Peter called out cheerfully as they entered. Eleanor greeted them both warmly. Her relationship with Dave had improved considerably over the past months. After his initial apology for tricking her onto the show, he had made amends by helping her navigate her sudden fame and by volunteering his technical skills for her new program. "The adaptive piano pedals are in this box," Dave explained, setting down his load carefully. "And I brought the modified sheet music stands for the violinists with vision impairment." "Thank you both," Eleanor said. "We couldn't do this without your help." "Are you kidding?" Peter grinned. "My grandmother, the famous pianist and innovator? I'm just happy to be associated with you." Eleanor swatted at him playfully. "Famous for 15 minutes, maybe. A lot longer than that," Dave commented. "The original clip has over 20 million views now, and the segment you helped redesign is the most popular part of the show." Eleanor shook her head, still amazed by numbers like that. "Well, fame isn't the point. Making music accessible to everyone, that's what matters." They loaded everything into Peter's van, and by 3 o'clock they were at Symphony Hall setting up for the evening's performance. The grand space, with its soaring ceiling and perfect acoustics, made Eleanor catch her breath every time she entered it. Richard Wilson greeted them in the lobby. "Eleanor, everything's coming together beautifully. The mayor just confirmed she'll be attending tonight." "The mayor?" Eleanor felt a flicker of nerves. You didn't mention that before? Richard smiled apologetically. She called this morning. Apparently, her mother was a pianist who gave up playing due to arthritis. Your story resonated with her. Eleanor nodded, understanding now why her program had touched so many people. Everyone knew someone who had given up something they loved due to age or physical limitations. Her story had given them hope that perhaps not everything had to be lost. As the afternoon progressed, the performers began to arrive. Elderly violinists with trembling hands paired with eager young students, retired opera singers with limited breath control working with voice majors, a former jazz drummer who had lost an arm now playing with a specially designed one-handed technique, alongside a percussion student. Eleanor moved among them, offering encouragement and last-minute advice. She felt a deep connection with each of them, understanding their struggles and their determination. By 6 o'clock, the hall was filled with the sound of instruments tuning and voices warming up. Eleanor retreated to a small dressing room to prepare herself. She sat at the small practice piano provided for performers, gently stretching her fingers. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," she called. To her surprise, Timothy Reed, the host of Laugh Factor, stepped into the room. He looked different than he had on the show, less polished, more genuine. "Mrs. Jenkins," he said, somewhat awkwardly. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Eleanor replied, though she felt a twinge of the old hurt seeing him again. "What brings you here tonight?" Timothy shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted to see the concert, of course. But mostly I wanted to speak with you privately." He paused. "I never properly apologized for what happened on the show. For what I did." Eleanor studied him thoughtfully. "You were doing your job, I suppose." "A job I'm not proud of," he admitted. "The way we treated people like you, it wasn't right. I knew it then, but I did it anyway." He looked at her directly. "The changes you've helped make to the show, they've made it something I can feel good about being part of again." Eleanor was surprised by his sincerity. "Thank you for telling me that." "There's something else," Timothy continued. "My daughter started piano lessons last month. She's 7. She saw your performance and told me she wanted to play just like the piano grandma when she grew up." Eleanor felt unexpected tears prick at her eyes. "That's the nicest thing anyone could say." Another knock came at the door. "10 minutes to places, Mrs. Jenkins," a stagehand called. Timothy nodded. "I should let you prepare. I just wanted you to know. What you did, it mattered. Not just to the audience, but to me, too." He extended his hand. Eleanor took it, feeling a sense of closure. "Enjoy the concert, Timothy." After he left, Eleanor turned back to the mirror. The woman who looked back at her was different from the one who had reluctantly agreed to appear on a television show 6 months ago. There was a confidence in her eyes now, a sense of purpose. When it was time, she made her way to the wings of the stage. The concert had been progressing beautifully, each pair of musicians demonstrating how talent could overcome physical limitations with the right adaptations and support. Richard Wilson stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to introduce the woman who inspired our Music Without Limits program. A lifelong music educator who reminded us all that talent, passion, and dignity know no age. Please welcome Eleanor Jenkins performing with our principal pianist, Thomas Chen." The applause was warm and genuine as Eleanor walked onto the stage. The bright lights reminded her momentarily of the television studio, but the feeling was entirely different. This time she was exactly where she was meant to be. Thomas, a brilliant young pianist in his 30s, smiled at her as she joined him at the specially modified grand piano. They had practiced for weeks, developing a duet arrangement that showcased both her musicality and his technical prowess. As they began to play, Eleanor felt a deep sense of rightness wash over her. This was her legacy. Not just the viral video or the transformed TV segment, but this moment of pure musical communication. The creation of a space where limitations were acknowledged but not allowed to have the final word. The music flowed between them. Eleanor's simplified left-hand part, blending seamlessly with Thomas's elaborate embellishments. Together they created something neither could have achieved alone, a perfect metaphor for the program she had helped build. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of breathless silence before the audience erupted into applause. Eleanor and Thomas stood to acknowledge it, and then Eleanor gestured to the side of the stage, inviting all of the evening's performers to join them. They came forward, Young and old, professionally trained and self-taught, physically whole and differently abled, united by their love of music and their refusal to be defined by limitations. As Eleanor looked out at the standing audience, she spotted Peter in the front row, applauding wildly. Beside him sat Judy, her neighbor who had helped choose the blue dress for the TV show. And there was Dave filming everything on his phone, no doubt already planning how to share this moment with an even wider audience. In that moment, Eleanor understood that what had begun as an attempt to humiliate her had transformed into something powerful and enduring. Her music, once confined to her living room, now reached people she would never meet. Her teaching, once limited to elementary school students, now spanned generations. What the producers of Laugh Factor hadn't understood was that true talent couldn't be diminished by mockery. Real passion couldn't be extinguished by age or physical limitations. And dignity, well, dignity came from facing humiliation with grace and turning it into something beautiful. As the applause continued, Eleanor Jenkins stood tall among her fellow musicians, her arthritic hands no longer something to hide but badges of a life spent in service to music, a life that at 72 had embarked on an unexpected but wonderful new chapter.